And we are live.
Yay.
Welcome,
Woohoo.
partners in crime. It is so good to see you. Just so you know, Elena, I was talking to her earlier and I was having major technical issues and we got them fixed. So we are good to go now. So, yay. So, welcome, Elena.
Thank you.
Um, you are here today about your brand new release, A Cold, Cold World, which is the second in your Bet Rivers mystery series.
Yes.
Congratulations on your new
Thank
release.
you. Thank you. I'm thrilled.
Absolutely. So everybody knows, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Elena. She spent several years working in theater as a playwright, a director, a designer, and an educator before turning her storytelling skills to fiction. Her first story, which you all know and love, are the Eddie Shoes Mysteries, written under the name Elena Hartwell. And that introduced a quirky mother daughter duo. Although I think you really need to put in something about her dad because he makes his appearances and he is.
I know. I kind of love him. Yeah, I do. I have to change up my tagline there.
So, with the Rivers mystery, Elena returns to her dramatic roots and brings readers much more serious and atmospheric novels. The series introduces Collier, Washington, with its dark and mysterious lake, tough as nails residents, and newly appointed sheriff, with her sidekick, Schweitzer. So, what kind of dog is Schweitzer again?
He's an Anatolian shepherd.
Yeah, I was never going to make that one.
Yeah, that's okay. They're amazing dogs. They are
Oh,
really amazing dogs.
is that what you have?
No, I don't. And I mean, I would think about an Anatolian, but they're really working dogs. And in fact, one of the ones that I have seen and just fell in love with is they use them as companion animals for the cheetahs in the San Diego Zoo. Yeah, so that when if they have a cheetah come in, they get an Anatolian Shepherd as a companion that keeps the cat calmer, feel safer and all of that. And so they may even grow up with an Anatolian Shepherd. And I mean I could actually have one out here and use them with my animals, but I have a golden retriever couch potato and a fat little half Shishan, half Bichon because I'm not out working, huge swaths of property. But they're amazing dog. Look them up. Yeah, you gotta
Okay.
Google them. They're pretty great. But the photos with them and the cheetahs is awesome.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to visit the zoo now.
I know that too.
Okay, so let's talk about Bet. And I guess let's first give me an introduction to Bet and your series.
So, it's interesting because Bet Rivers came to me sort of fully formed. Like I knew her name was Bet, short for Elizabeth. Like I knew she was Bet, not Beth or Lizzie or Elizabeth or any of that. Like I knew who she was from the get-go. And she has been living in Los Angeles. Her father gets sick. She comes home to her tiny little town, high in the Cascades, Washington State. And she thinks she's there as an interim sheriff. And I'm not giving anything away. He dies before the book starts. And so he has just died. And so she's um faced with the question of, do I stay and be sheriff of this tiny little town, knowing this is would then be the rest of my life? And or do I go back to LA knowing I probably can't ever come back and be sheriff? Someone else will fill that role. And she'd always sort of had in her mind that she would make her mark in the world and be a police detective in LA with a big, all of the support and everything, and then come back and, 10 years from now. And so it's bumped up this timeline in ways she didn't expect. And so I like that in that first book, she's really grappling with that question of, yeah, both paths are good. Y'all, when you're writing a book, when you're talking about conflict and we're talking about drama, you don't give them a good choice and a bad choice because then there's no conflict there. We'll take the good choice. You give them two good choices, right? And let them grapple with that, or two bad choices and let them grapple with that.
It's much fun.
Yeah, right. It creates a lot more conflict, and readers can be torn about what they want the character to do, and really understand that struggle. So that was the origins of it.
Oh,
Yeah.
so give us the plot summary for A Cold Cold World.
Yeah, so in a cold, cold world, it starts out. So she's had her first successful. I don't think I'm giving anything away to say in a mystery that she had was succeeded in her first homicide investigation. Right, pretty typical outcome there. So she's feeling better. She stayed in Collier, and she's now facing her second um potential, not
Mhm.
sure, investigation. And it's a couple months later. It's in the middle of the largest snowstorm her community has ever seen. And the book starts out with she goes up on the ridge where she's been told there has been a snowmobile accident. And she arrives, and there's something that happens there. I'm not going to give it away. There's something that happens that makes her think it's not as simple as a teenage boy having an accident, that there was more involved and that it could potentially be a homicide. And that's what launches her investigation to find out. And I really pitted her. The title is very apt, Cold Cold World. I pitted her against the environment in this book. She is in the first one because Collier is this rural, very rural, very rugged. People who don't live in the Pacific Northwest may not realize how rugged our mountains are. They're so rugged that occasionally firefighters let fires burn out because they cannot be fought when they're in such rugged terrain. Maybe they can do some air support, but that's about it. And we have millions of acres of trees with no people in them at all ever, that have that's why the Sasquatch is alive and well. Millions of acres of absolutely untouched forest out here. And so our environment is both stunningly beautiful and really great for murder mysteries because it's unknown, it's difficult to get into, cell phones aren't going to, all the technology can be kind of done away with. And so I really pit her against the environment in the second book, which was a lot of fun to do.
I can imagine. I listened to the excerpt on Books to a Ceiling,
Yeah, yeah,
and hearing like the suspense, and it was just the lead in before she
yeah,
goes to search for the boy, and talking about, the storm coming, and
yeah.
what they found and what's going. Oh, it was so scary.
Thank you. Thank you.
So how are you able to use the scenery to create the suspense in the novel?
Yeah, and so the thing about the storm, I'll tell you how where the storm came from. So I used to live in a little town called North Bend. I'm now in Spokane, out on the eastern side of the state, but I used to live in North Bend, and Collier is not a real town, but it's kind of based on Roslyn, which is made famous by Northern Exposure. It's where they filmed Northern Exposure. So it's kind of based on that town and a little bit about North Bend where I lived, which is where they filmed Kyle MacLachlan, the I just blanked out Twin Peaks, right? They where they filmed Twin Peaks. So North Bend, ordinarily in the wintertime, we might get a couple inches of snow. It might be on the ground for a week. Like you never plowed. I think there was one plow in the area kind of thing. So one winter we had 8 weeks of nonstop snow. It at times was 3.5 feet on my driveway.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and it just kept coming. We'd have a clear day, and then the next day it would be snowing again. And it was the National Guard had to be called in to dig us out, the community out. I mean, from the
I mean, a day or
freeway.
two of snow is pretty, but after that,
It was 8 weeks, and my home was so far away from anything, the center of town, that I wasn't even on the list to get plowed out. I had a neighbor with a snowplow on his tractor, and he came in and dug us out. But at the time, it was sort of wonderful because I can work from home. It was stunningly beautiful. I have a generator if the power goes out. I wasn't in any kind of danger. But I was very, very struck with how tenuous that was. If we'd had an emergency, you would not have been able to get out. They couldn't have gotten anybody in. Um, and so when I was approaching the second book, and I had sort of thought, well, it's gonna be a couple months later, it's gonna be in the wintertime. I had just been through the snowstorm, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's got to be facing this storm of the century. And it was easier to kind of invest that that anxiety because I had been through it and I was safe and could extrapolate out, like, taking the dog out at night and you're in 3 feet of snow, like it's a lot of work. And I'm thinking, well, can you imagine if you were hunting down a killer or trying to find a lost child or even just trying to reach somebody who'd had a heart attack? Right.
Yeah,
And so it was, I had very real world details about what it sounds like, what it felt like, what the wind was like, how the snow sliding off the trees when that's all you can hear. It's just all that
that's
great,
creepy.
yeah, all that great atmospheric stuff. And then you put it, there might have been a graveyard, which is a real thing. You can go to Roslyn and see the graveyard that's in that
Yeah.
book. So yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So, what are some of your favorite characters in this mystery, A Cold Cold World?
So, obviously I love Bet, but there's a couple more minor characters. Well, I wouldn't even call them minor, but secondary characters that I love, love, love. And one is Alma. So Alma is a almost octogenarian, and she kind of runs the station, and she's loosely based on a real person.
Hmm.
I used to work for a little theater company called Civic Light Opera in Seattle, and it was basically me and Alma who ran the company, and was the office person and did all the office stuff, and I was the tech director, and I built all the sets and all of that, and so she was bouffant hair up to here. She drove a big convertible Cadillac, tough as nails. She just brooked no guff from swine. I mean, she just would put you in your place. She lived to be, I think, into her 90s, and tough tough to her dying day. And so Alma is sort of an homage to that real person. So I'm very fond of Alma. She can make me cranky, but I'm very fond of her. And then I have a new character, and I don't want to give away too much about him either, named Kane Stand, who he intrigues me. He intrigues me because I have a sense of him. I know how he fits into this book. I know how he would fit in the future. I know a lot about his background in my head, but he has secrets from me that I want to kind of dig into. Yeah, right. I'm like, I think I know what this is about, but there may be more layers under here. So he's kind of a mysterious character to me, and so I'm really excited about exploring him.
Now, is he the guy who lives up on top of the mountain?
He is the nephew of George Stand. Yeah,
Okay.
he's a nephew of a character that appears in book one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm very excited about him.
that sounds very exciting. So, what was it like to write Bet and the deep and the emotional after writing Eddie, who was light and quirky and fun and like they're complete opposites.
They really are in a lot of ways. I mean, I would argue that fundamentally underlying them, they are very similar because they're a lot about fairness and justice and caring for people. Like that's the one their underpinnings are the same. But yeah, they're completely different characters. And the funny thing is I actually wrote Bet first.
Really?
All I wrote All We Buried before I wrote One Dead, Two to Go, but it didn't go anywhere. And so I put it in a drawer and I wrote the Eddie books. And then I pulled it back out, rewrote, and then it sold. So I actually had written Bet first.
Mhm.
And Eddie was a break. And where it came from, I think, wanting to do something fun and quirky. I am a funny person. Like I love
Yeah.
humor, I love, comedy and things like that. But I had been working in the theater for 20 years. And as a playwright, I wrote very serious plays. There was a lot of humor in them. The dialogue could be funny. Characters would say funny things, but they were grappling with huge issues. I wrote a lot about PTSD, characters with PTSD. I wrote about the colony collapse disorder in the bees. I had a character who's a beekeeper and her bees are disappearing. And I had, plays about just really heavy things. And I had written All We Buried, really a pretty dark book. And I think I wanted a break
Yeah.
from my 20 years of doing a lot of sort of social activist theater. So Eddie just kind of was an absolute delight to write because she is so, fun and snarky and
She's
Her
hilarious.
you run a, you know, and her mom is just such a hoot to me. And so I think that that was the break. And then I knew I wanted the Sheriff Bet Rivers to be a series. And so I wrote that second book. And I enjoy going back and forth between, one of the things about being a playwright is you're not tied to a genre. And not novelists, they sort of have this expectation of you having a lane, and that's not true in the theater. And so in the theater, I would go back and forth between plays that were funny or funnier and plays that were more serious. And so it didn't occur to me when I moved into novel writing that I shouldn't do the same. But it is why they're out under two different names. Because readers, unlike audiences are sort of up for whatever. A season might have a musical and a comedy and but readers have a tendency to, "Oh, this is my lane." And so we put them out under two different names because anyone who picked up All We Buried expecting an Eddie book is going to be a very taken aback.
Shocked? Just a
A
little.
little bit. It's like, wow, this is not funny. No, it's not funny.
So do you pull in your snarkiness because your character or you personally are fun and
Yeah,
snarky and
yeah.
just light?
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day, and I think the distinction is that Eddie's who I am and Bet is who I am on the inside, who I think about. So like Eddie is my external face to the world. I'm a lot like Eddie. And Shava, her mom, Chava. I'm actually a lot like her mother. But Bet is my intellectual side. Bet is who I am on the inside, and or the person who, if there's a crisis, I'm not funny. I'm on it, right? Like if something's going wrong, I don't panic. I deal with it. And so it's like that corner of me is Bet. And so I can tap into either one.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
It is
Just
fun. It is fun
being
because I
able to
can.
be two different
It,
people.
it is, and they're both better than I am. Like Eddie can be funny, longer and have the right comebacks, and her mom can, they do things that are outrageous that I wouldn't necessarily do, but I can understand it. And then, Bet is the ultimately cool under pressure. I'm great in a crisis, but I'm not sure you want me around if somebody's shooting at you. Like I might not be that go-to person, but Bet is. So like I get to make them me, but more.
Yeah, I really like Bet because she's very focused. And but she's all about the people and she
Yeah,
she genuinely cares about everyone.
yeah,
Um
yeah. She
and
really
like
does.
so does Eddie, but just their reactions are
Yeah.
different.
Well, and Eddie cares about it one person at a time. Eddie cares about her current client or the current
Yeah,
situation. Bet is big
community.
picture. She's the whole community
Yeah.
and what's best for everyone. And so there's also a distinction in sort of how they're thoughtful, right? Eddie wouldn't necessarily think about, well, if I do X, it's going to be bad for a whole bunch of people. She's not going to think about that. She's, what am I doing of this person right in front of me? And Bet is going, I have to balance out what's best for 1,000 people. And
Yeah.
that's sort of the distinction between the two. And that is, as human beings, that is our constant. That's our constant dilemma. Do I do what's right for me and my family, even if that's going to hurt someone else? Or do I look to the greater good? Do I do something that's going to be better for a larger number of people, even if I don't like it? Or do I mean, that is sort of the constant human dilemma.
It's a huge dilemma.
It
And
is.
and you pull it into both books or both series really well and in
Thank you.
completely different ways.
Yeah, which is fun.
So since you started kind of as a playwright,
Yeah.
what were your favorite things to write? Or did you like just switching around?
I liked switching around. I liked switching around. And as a playwright, I had some really interesting things that I got to do, that I was asked to do, which gave me different things to think about. So for example, I think it was three productions with ADWAS, which is Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Services in
Oh, wow.
Seattle. And so I wrote scripts for deaf actors, the deaf community, about dealing with domestic violence. And then
Wow.
they were translated into sign language and performed, by deaf actors. And so like, here's something I never would have done, right? I never would have had that opportunity, but I was invited in and asked to do that. And I did three of those. It was wonderful experience, an incredible experience to work with that community and
Huh.
such important content, because if you want to see an isolated people, it's, victims of domestic abuse that are deaf because they don't have a lot of the resources, or accessibility. So it was an important project and exciting. And then like I had another one where a college hired me to write a play and it could be about anything, but I had to have monologues for every character. I had to have a certain number of scenes, everybody had to have equal because it was for an acting,
Yeah.
class and, for students, and it was performed, which is wonderful. It was produced by the college, but like to think about, okay, how do I make each character have a monologue and a scene between, X number of characters. And so it was like a puzzle. And I wrote it about, and I wanted, younger characters. It was a excuse me, it was a college. So I could have characters I could sort of go to 16-ish, or I could go to sort of 25-ish, like I have these sort of parameters. And so I set it at a high school and made it about cyberbullying and a suicide. And, so it was, and I got letters. This was what was amazing to me. I got letters from students who were not theater kids who had to see the play. They were, oh, their English class made them go or whatever. And I got letters from these kids writing to me and saying, this changed an aspect of my life. They either were considering suicide or they'd had a friend who committed suicide and no one had talked to them about it in the way that my characters dealt with the situation. So, I'm getting sent these letters from these 20-year-old kids, and I had one, her mom dragged her to it, and she ended up taking all of her friends the next weekend, and she writes me this beautiful letter about how it was so important to her that she brought all her friends. I mean, it was just an incredible experience.
Yeah.
And so, as a playwright, the immediacy of interacting with people is, you really can't repeat that. I love being a novelist. I love being a novelist, and I love talking to people, but it is a very different experience.
Oh, I can
Yeah.
imagine.
That was a
Wow.
long answer.
No, it's amazing and it's so sweet. I mean, because that builds you up as a
Yeah.
person, but
Yeah.
even thinking about those kids and I mean, how many kids don't think about who actually wrote the play? I
Yeah.
mean, it impacted
Yeah.
them, but they look at the actors because they're the ones that
Yeah.
are so
Yeah.
to have, it
Yeah.
impacted them enough that they dug into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. To think to spend the time to write a letter and give it over to the chair of the department and say, can you mail this to Elena? It was like, I was stunned to have that happen. It was quite moving.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So since you're switching back and forth, does that mean we've got another Bet Rivers coming soon?
I hope so. So, the publishing industry is tough. It's tough. And so I'm in an interesting situation. I've never been in this spot before. So we're hopeful, my agent and I are very hopeful that the publishers are going to want a third book. It's going to really depend on sales. It has to sell well. But what we're having to do is I've written a first chapter to a third book and I've written a synopsis, and I've never written a synopsis before I've written a book before.
Yeah,
So
right.
that
That's like
was
backwards.
felt very bad. And writers do it all the time. But typically it's something that you do when you're sort of, you're established and they know, that book's gonna sell or whatever. And so it's not an unusual thing, but I personally have never had to do it. And so it was really challenging. I had moments where I was like, I should just write the whole book and then like write the synopsis. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that will happen. So keep your fingers crossed. You're going to be one of the first people I tell if I get that
Looks
third book
good.
deal.
Okay, so I know that you work a lot with debut authors and new authors, and you do editing. So, what is a tip that you would give to aspiring authors? Um, that something that you like really think about a lot?
Yeah, I would give a two-part. I'm going to give a
Mhm.
two-part answer, which is tenacity and flexibility are the two things that authors need. People are like,
Yeah.
oh, am I a good enough writer? I'm like, well, I don't know. Doesn't matter. If you work at it long enough, you will be. Like, you
Yeah.
know, but the question is not, are you good enough? The question is that, are you going to stick it out? Are you going to stick it out through 100 rejections
Mhm.
for getting an agent? And then when you have the agent, are you going to stick it out through 100 rejections from editors until you land with a publisher? Are you going to be, when you get that just scathingly bad review, are you going to pick yourself up and keep working on the next book? Like, it's that kind of tenacity. In terms of skills, anybody can learn the craft. Obviously, there are exceptional writers, those that top 1% where you're like, this is the greatest book I've ever read. Are you going to be that? Yeah, I'm not going to promise you that. But there's so many great books out there that we love and enjoy. They're not perfect, but they're wonderful. And we love them and we read the next one. Are they flawed? Sure, but they're really solid books. You can be that writer, right? You can learn that craft. You can become that writer. And so, people who worry about good enough, that's the wrong question. It's not, am I good enough? It's, do I have the tenacity? Can I stick it out when I get bad news or I'm rejected or I'm told my book isn't good? And then the flexibility part is writers who have the hardest time sticking it out are those writers that don't want to change a word. Oh, no, that word is so perfect. Well, no, it's not, or I wouldn't be pointing it out to you. Right? Oh, but this chapter's so good, but it doesn't move the book forward. It doesn't matter. It's a great chapter. You got to cut it. It doesn't move the story forward. And those authors who are very rigid in rewrites or flexibility about that are the ones who can't handle it when they get a bad review, who can't handle it when they're rejected. So I see those two things as happening hand in hand. So my theater background allowed me, even with my very first novel, and my editors have often commented, they're like, Elena, you're so easy to work with. Like, you're willing to be flexible. And I'm like, hey, as a playwright, you sat in a room with a bunch of actors and a director, and they're all making changes. And you're like, oh, that's better. I'm like, why wouldn't I let a professional editor who I trust make my book better? Like, why wouldn't I want that? Whether it's tweaking a line or upping a stake or clarifying something. Now I'm going to fight for something if I feel like that would change my voice. But most really good editors, they're not trying to change your voice. They're like, a reader could read this way or that way. This needs a little clarity. Or, the stakes aren't very high in the scene. Can you up that? Like, those are good things. So tenacity and flexibility.
That's interesting. You know, the tenacity, because you can be an amazing writer
Yeah,
and your timing might just be off. You might have the wrong editor, you might have the
yeah,
wrong publicist, you might like
absolutely.
there's so many things that have nothing to do with your
Yep,
skills,
yep,
or even the book.
yeah,
I mean, it
yeah,
might not have anything to do with the plot or the writing or the all the stuff.
yeah,
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 so I mean, that's amazing.
yeah, yeah. It
Uh,
really is. I mean, you said timing. Timing is everything. If you write that fantastic vampire book, but you're just a little bit behind the curveball there, it's not going to sell.
right.
Or you write that great vampire book and no one else has done it and you're ahead of the curve. It's not going to sell. It's
It's going to
like,
come back though. So just
it'll come back. Hang on to it. Well, All We Buried is a perfect example. All three of my Eddie books came out before All We Buried, and I had written All We
Mhm.
Buried first. And I just never, I'm like, well, it's not its time. I'll come back to it. You just have to believe that. It is truly the long game.
Yeah, I agree. And the
Yeah.
flexibility, because we've all read those books that you're like, I don't think
Mm,
that person would say that. That
mhm.
doesn't work in my head.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to
Yeah.
be ready to change
Yeah.
those little things.
Trust your editor.
Yeah,
If you don't trust your
find
editor,
a good editor
you're
first.
not in the right place. If you're
Yes.
working with an editor and you got to rethink that relationship.
Yeah,
You got to be able to trust your editor, and make sure that that's on not on your side, that you're holding on too tight, right? But if
yeah,
you're like, oh,
right.
I'm getting a lot of bad advice, they may not be a good person for you. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's also true.
Uh, So where can we find you? I mean, I know we've got your website and your blog and allegory editing for all your editing services,
Yeah.
but I know you volunteer and you go to conferences and what kind of things can we find you at?
Yeah, I have some fun live events. And I am going to say, don't miss all my fantastic stops on my Partners in Crime book tour, which are available in the event section of my website.
Oh, cool.
You can go to all of those stops, it's been a fantastic tour. I don't want it to end. I do have a couple live things coming up. On Monday, September 9th, I'm going to be in Seattle, Lake Forest Park, Third Place Books at 7 o'clock. And that's going to be super fun because it's like me and I want to say 7 other authors, and we're all doing 5-minute readings from our books. So it's gonna be
Oh,
all of
that'll
us.
be
Like
fun.
it's just, yeah, it's like a ton of mystery authors. It's gonna be great. So that's Lake Forest Park, Third Place Books, September 9th. On Thursday, September 12th, 5:30 p.m., I'm going to be at the South Hill Library here in Spokane with another author. We're going to talk about plots and characters, and we have a funny name. What did we decide? Who done it and why? Who done it and why? So that's going to be really fun. And then I'm going to be at a conference right on the Sound in Edmonds, Washington, October 4th to the 6th. I'm teaching 2 workshops there, which I'm super excited about. And then as an editor, I'm going to be at the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, PNWA conference. Allegory, we always have a table. We meet writers, come up and I'll do a 1-page edit on your first page and tell you how it's working. Yeah, so and we love to meet writers. So we do that conference every year in person. We have a table for people to come and hang out.
That is so fun. I can't
Yeah.
wait. Send me those and I'll include those in the show notes
I
so everybody
will.
can come find you.
Awesome. That would be awesome. Thank you. I will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Elena, our time is up for today. So I guess you're going to have to write another book so we can do this again.
I would love to.
Cool. Thank you, partners in crime. We will see you again soon. And hopefully, Elena will be back with us again.
Thanks all. Thanks for having me.